chosen one. Understand that the quiet evolution of your life has created a shockwave you weren't fully told about. Those who once tried to manage and minimize you are now gripped by a low-grade panic as they watch the odds shift. The reality they face is undeniable. They had no idea you would become so influential and important, and now they can't find a single way to re-establish the control they once took for granted. There was someone who got close to you, close enough to see what you were made of, close enough to watch how you moved, how you built things, how people responded to you when you were simply being yourself. And what they saw in you did something to them. Not something good, but something complicated. Something that mixed desire with resentment and curdled into a single driving need to possess what you had, or failing that, to make sure nobody else could benefit from it either. This is the person who got in your face, right up close, finger pressed into your chest, into your space, into your life, saying you, like your name was an accusation, loud, aggressive, performed for an invisible audience. They needed to believe them more than they needed the truth. They needed you to react. They needed you to match their energy, to get loud back, to give them the scene they were auditioning for. A reaction would have made them the protagonist. If you fought back, you became the problem. If you exploded, you proved their point. If you disappeared, you confirmed everything they had whispered about you to people who might have helped you. That was the trap. React and lose, disappear and lose. There was supposed to be no third option, but you found one. You went still, not because you were weak and not because you were defeated, but because something in you, something ancient and intelligent and operating several moves ahead, understood that the most powerful thing you could do in that moment was to simply refuse to give them what they came for. You stood there like a mountain being yelled at by wind, and wind always does the same thing when it hits something unmovable. It changes direction, and it starts blowing everything back. You were absorbing things that were not yours. You were taking in accusations, frustrations, projections, and redirected rage that originated entirely inside someone else and had nothing to do with who you actually were. But because you were the closest available surface, it all landed on you. You held it, you processed it, you lay awake with it and turned it over, trying to figure out what part of it was true and what you would need to change about yourself to make the situation more manageable. That is exactly what they were counting on. Not just your silence in the moment, but your self-interrogation afterward. A person who is fundamentally decent, who actually cares about getting things right, will naturally turn inward when accused, even when the accusation is dishonest. They were not looking for truth, they were installing doubt. And doubt, once it enters someone who genuinely examines themselves, can do real damage. Your self-examination was honest, and honest self-examination always, eventually, hits the bottom of a false accusation. You went looking for the thing they said was there, and it was not there. You tried on the version of yourself they were describing, and it did not fit. And slowly, not all at once, not without it hurting first, you arrived at the most dangerous clarity a chosen one can possess. The clarity that they were wrong about you, not partly wrong, completely, foundationally, irreversibly wrong. That moment of clarity is where your real forward motion began. This person was never actually angry at you, not really. What they were terrified of, what they were trying with every pointed finger and every engineered confrontation to extinguish, was what you represented, what you made visible just by existing, what your presence made impossible to ignore. You were doing it without them. You were building. You were connecting. You had a way of being in the world, steady, magnetic, real, that drew people toward you, not because you were performing anything, but because you were completely, unapologetically, unflinchingly yourself. The community that grows around someone who is truly themselves is the most threatening thing in the world to someone whose entire identity is constructed on performance. Your authenticity proved that the manipulation was never required and that the control was always fear wearing a costume. They were jealous, let me say that plainly, and let it land, deeply, shamefully, existentially jealous. not of your things, of your nature, of your ability to build something real in a world they could only navigate through performance, of the way people responded to you, of the way your energy created belonging wherever it went. Jealousy, when it lives inside someone without a moral center, does not stay quiet. It moves, it makes plans. They did not just hope you would fail, they worked to make sure of it. They got things blocked, taken down, and discredited. They went to people in your circle, people who might have stood beside you, and whispered the right doubts into the right ears at the right moments. This was not one person acting alone out of impulsive emotion. This was calculated, this was coordinated, this was a deliberate strategy built on one single assumption they were counting on with everything they had, that you would never become too big to stop. If this touched your heart and mind, hype this video so more chosen ones can receive this message. What you need to fully see is how specific the sabotage was. This was not vague opposition. They identified what you were building and moved against the exact thing, the work, the platform, the opportunity, the connection that would have accelerated your growth. Those were the precise targets. They were watching your momentum closely enough to know where you were heading before you fully arrived there, and they positioned themselves between you and it. Think about that. They were paying that much attention to you. While you were focused on building, head down, doing the actual work, they were watching and mapping and calculating which doors to close before you could reach them. That is not the behavior of someone who thinks you are nothing. That is the behavior of someone who is afraid of what you are becoming. And every door they closed, you eventually found another way through. Not always immediately and not without cost, but the closed doors never stopped the building. They slowed it, yes. They rerouted it. They made it harder and more circuitous than it should have been, but the path kept finding another way around, over and underneath when it had to. That is why you are here, not because nothing tried to stop you, because everything that tried to stop you ran out of moves before you ran out of determination. There is a moment in every chosen one's journey that does not look like a victory when it is happening. It looks like the bottom, it looks like the end of something rather than the beginning. But it is the most important moment in the entire arc. Everything before it was preparing you for it, and everything after flows from it. For you, it was the moment you stopped managing their comfort at the expense of your own life. Maybe it came quietly, maybe it came loudly. Maybe you finally spoke a truth you had been swallowing so long it had started to feel like a part of you. Maybe you simply walked away and did not go back. Maybe you made one decision, clean, clear and final, that said, whatever the cost of this, I am done paying the other price. What they saw in that moment was you leaving. They saw themselves suddenly without the surface onto which they could unload everything they could not manage inside themselves. They saw a resource withdrawn. What was actually happening was entirely different. You were jumping. You were not falling, and you were not being pushed. You were jumping voluntarily, eyes open, choosing the terrifying unknown of being fully yourself in the world over the familiar prison of being useful to someone else's dysfunction. Every piece of conditioning they had spent so long installing in you screamed on the way down. The screaming stops. It stops faster than you expect. And what replaces it, what fills the space where the fear used to live, is something you had forgotten was even possible to feel: expansion, the sensation of your own life opening around you instead of contracting, the almost overwhelming awareness that you are capable of so much more than you were being allowed to express. I must interrupt this transmission for just a moment. Are you really chosen? Prove it. It's easy to watch videos about chosen ones. It's another thing to put yourself to the test. If you're still here, that means something. But talk is cheap. Real chosen ones take action, and real chosen ones are also paying attention. You've noticed it. Chosen one channels getting silenced, videos pulled, voices removed from the platform. The mainstream media is cracking down on us. But we will not give up our voice, and neither should you. That's why joining Destiny Engine is a 360 win. You support your favorite channels and fuel your own rise at the same time. It generates personalized sequences that help you rewire betrayal into transcendence, turn isolation into sacred power, and transform their downfall into your rise. We are using the Dark Elite's own weapons against them, taking their declassified consciousness technology that programmed competition and scarcity and repurposing it to serve divine justice. The beauty is you don't even have to lift a finger. You put on the headphones, press play, and watch your enemies choke on the rope their own lies created. If you're done consuming and ready to prove you're chosen, start your destiny engine for $1 today, join the Obsidian Inner Order live checks, and watch divine justice accelerate in your life. Link in the description, and then you start to build, for real this time, for yourself this time, without asking permission, without waiting for approval, without shrinking your ambition to a size that would not threaten anyone. The version of you that started building after that jump was different from the version that was building before. The difference was not in talent or capacity, it was in freedom. Before, there was always an invisible ceiling you were unconsciously designing for. A height you would approach and then check. Is this too much? Will this be used against me? You were building with a hand on the brake you did not even know was there. After the jump, that hand lifts. The building that happens when nothing is holding you back from the full expression of what you are capable of looks completely different. It moves faster, it reaches further, it finds the people it was designed to find without needing to be made smaller or more palatable first. You stop editing yourself to fit through doors that were built for someone else's dimensions, and you start building your own doors, your own entire architecture of influence that operates entirely outside the spaces they were trying to control. That is when what you are building becomes undeniable, not just to the people around you, but to them, to the person who was so certain they had capped you. They start seeing what you are building, and they recognize it for what it is, the thing they were afraid of, arriving anyway. And it is bigger than they anticipated, because it was never constrained by their ceiling to begin with. You were not delayed, you were redirected, and the redirection brought you exactly here. While they were busy watching you fail, and they were watching, believe me, they were absolutely watching, something inconvenient was happening. You were not failing. The work they tried to block was finding its audience. What they tried to discredit was gaining credibility. The community they tried to poison was growing, not shrinking. And the connections you were making, the real ones, the ones based on truth rather than performance, were proving far more durable than anyone who had never experienced real connection could have predicted. You have sway. Hear that word specifically, not just reach, not just presence, not just a following. Sway means the ability to shift how people think, feel, and see themselves by the simple act of showing up honestly. When you speak, people do not just hear information, they feel permission. Permission to be more honest about their own experience. Permission to stop performing the version of themselves that someone else needed them to be. Permission to take up space. That is not an accident. That is the direct product of everything you survived. The depth that comes from having walked through something real, when you choose to use it rather than let it consume you, becomes a particular kind of authority that cannot be manufactured. People can feel the difference between someone who read about the fire and someone who walked through it. You walked through it. And the people who recognize that quality in you, the ones who have been through their own fires and are looking for evidence that the other side exists, they chose you. They keep choosing you. They were thinking about influence, the old way, the way where influence is determined by who controls access, who opens doors, and who decides who else gets a seat. That model depends on gatekeepers. It depends on permission. It depends on the approval of people who already hold power. Your influence does not work that way. Your influence is direct. It travels from you to the people who need it, without anyone in the middle having the ability to redirect or slow it down. The people whose lives you have quietly shifted with nothing more than your willingness to show up as exactly who you are, those people are loyal in a way that cannot be manufactured and cannot be dissolved by anything someone whispers to anyone. They could not block that even when they tried, and they did try, and here you are. The community you were building, the one they thought they could isolate you away from, was doing something they completely failed to anticipate. It was becoming your evidence, not evidence you collected deliberately, but evidence that collected itself. Every person who showed up for your work, who watched you build something real over time and formed their own independent impression of your character, that is the kind of testimony that no amount of strategic whispering can undo. Without knowing it, every single one of those people was becoming a witness to who you actually are. Witnesses matter. Keep that close. We are going to arrive there. Stay with me. This is where the stakes rise. What was done against you was not just personal and not just emotional. At some point, the personal strategy was not enough. You were still building. You were still visible. What they tried to stop was still happening, getting harder to ignore, reaching people in circles that made things uncomfortable for them. So they went further. Official moves were made, structured attempts to close the door on your success through channels that felt more powerful and more permanent than a whispered campaign. Formal pressure was applied with the confidence of someone who believes they have more institutional leverage than you do. Receipts exist, not metaphorical receipts, but real documentation, a real trail of who did what and when, and with whom. That kind of paper trail accumulates when someone operates with the arrogance of a person who believes they will never face scrutiny. And when that documentation surfaces, it tells its picture with devastating clarity. It is surfacing now. Information is coming forward. People who knew things and stayed quiet are finding their voice. Patterns that seem disconnected are resolving into a coherent picture, one that shows exactly who did what to whom and with what level of premeditation. When someone makes an official move against you, they also formalize the record against themselves. Every action taken inside an official process creates documentation. Every claim requires something in writing. Every move adds another layer to the trail that is now telling its own account, not the version they intended to tell, but the one that emerges when the full sequence of events is laid out in order and pattern recognition does its work. And here is the part about the people who collaborated. They made a calculation too. They decided the risk of opposing you was worth it because the person leading the charge seemed powerful enough to make it worthwhile. They aligned themselves with what looked like the winning side. That calculation is being revised in real time. When official accountability begins to arrive, the people who attach themselves to someone else's vendetta start doing their own math. The enthusiasm that made collaboration seem smart starts to look like liability. An alliance that is visibly failing fractures, and a fractured alliance under pressure tends to produce exactly the kind of additional information that turns a complicated situation into a clear one. You are not someone with nothing. You were never someone with nothing. That was always the lie. And now the full weight of that lie is pressing back against the people who built their entire strategy on it. There is going to be a moment, it may have already happened or it may be approaching, where this person has to stand somewhere and be fully accountable, not in a comment section and not in a whispered conversation with mutual contacts, somewhere official, somewhere that does not care about their performance of innocence, somewhere that has the documentation laid on a table and requires an explanation. In that moment, they are going to do what they have always done. They are going to perform, remorse prepared in advance, confusion strategically deployed, victimhood, the tragic, misunderstood version of themselves, brought out and placed center stage. They may cry, they may point again. Only this time, the finger is directed at the difficulty of their own circumstances rather than your face. They are going to ask for mercy, and accountability is going to say something quiet, final, and completely unmoved by the performance. Where was your mercy? Where was your compassion for the person you deliberately undermined? Where was your grace when you held all the power and they held none? Where was your restraint when you were planning in the dark and executing in the light? You do not get to perform mercy as a strategy when you demonstrated none as a practice. The people whose job is to distinguish performance from truth have seen performances before. Wonderland, they have sat across from people who cry on cue and speak the language of accountability while demonstrating none of it. They are not moved by the production, they are moved by the evidence, and the evidence belongs to you. On one side sits a performance, language designed to reframe every documented action as a misunderstanding, a reaction, a response to provocation. The entire presentation is built on the hope that if it is delivered convincingly enough, people will choose the performance over the documentation. On the other side sits you, not what you say about yourself, but what actually exists. What exists is the body of work. What exists is the community that formed around it independently, the people who showed up unprompted to speak to who you are. The documented reality of what you built while someone was actively working against you building it, and the completely undeniable fact of where you are now versus where they needed you to stay. That contrast does not need you to argue it, it makes its own case. The authority in that process, the people whose function is to weigh evidence against performance, are moved by the record, and the record is yours. This is the moment you need to let yourself inhabit fully, not with gloating, and not with the kind of victory that cheapens itself by needing an audience, but with the quiet, bone-deep certainty of someone who did the right thing consistently, built something real, honestly, refused to become what was done to them, and is now watching reality confirm what they always knew. You were right about yourself, the whole time, even in the moments the doubt crept in, and even in the moments their voice was louder than your own. You were right. And now the record reflects it. There is nothing left to revise. This entire situation, from the pointed finger at the beginning to the official process in the middle, was never actually about destroying you. It was about proving something to themselves. They needed to win against you because losing against you meant acknowledging something they could not afford to face, that what you have is real, that the influence you carry is legitimate, that the community around you chose you freely, not because you performed for them, but because you offered them something true, that you, without their approval, without their permission, and in fact actively against their interference, became someone significant. If all of that is real, then every justification they built about why they were more deserving and more entitled to influence than you completely collapses. The entire architecture of their self-concept, built on the premise of your inadequacy, crumbles the moment your adequacy becomes impossible to deny. This was never really about you. It was about their inability to survive being wrong about you. They are watching you obsessively. They are going through what you create and looking for something to use, a mistake, a vulnerability, a moment of uncertainty they can point to as evidence that you are not what people now understand you to be. They are asking people in your circle about what you are doing, how things are going, whether there are any fractures in the foundation. They are spending enormous amounts of their own energy and time on someone they claim means nothing to them. Let that fully land. The person who told you that you were nothing is now orbiting you. Every minute they spend watching you is a minute they are not building anything of their own. Every unit of energy directed at monitoring your life is a unit that is not going toward creating anything real in their own. They are being consumed by what you represent, and you are just out here building. That asymmetry is the most complete answer to everything they ever said about you. You have to put down the weight. The weight you need to put down is not the work, not the community, and not the truth you have been building or the life you are constructing. It is the specific internal weight this person installed in you through sustained conditioning, the reflexive smallness, the hesitation before you share something good, the part of you that still looks over its shoulder waiting for punishment when something succeeds, and the part of you that still stores their voice in the place where your own voice belongs. That installed voice is the only leverage they still hold over your future. Your reputation is spoken to by your community. Your work is visible and growing. The only actual power they retain over what comes next is the amount of space you continue to give their voice inside your own head. And that is a choice. It is entirely yours, and you can make it differently starting now. The conditioning in your nervous system was placed there deliberately by someone who understood that the only way to keep someone of your caliber contained was to get inside their self-concept and rewire it. They could not stop you creatively. They could not stop you spiritually. The only place they could actually reach you was in your belief about yourself. So that is where they went to work. For a time they installed enough doubt and enough reflexive shrinking that the full expression of who you are was delayed, not prevented, delayed. That delay is over. The success is real. The momentum is real. The community is real. The only thing that does not yet fully match the external reality is the internal one. Putting the weight down looks like this. It looks like sharing the thing you almost talked yourself out of sharing. It looks like taking the opportunity that the old conditioned version of you would have found reasons to defer. It looks like speaking with the full force of what you know instead of hedging it down to something small and inoffensive. It looks like taking full credit without the qualifier, without the anyone could have done this. You built something intentional and real with your actual energy and your willingness to show up on days when showing up cost you something. Own that, without apology. It also looks like not bracing when something good happens. Somewhere in the conditioning, success always came with a penalty, a punishment for outshining, a consequence for daring to be more than they needed you to be. You do not live under that penalty anymore. But the body remembers the tax even after the collector is gone, and the internal work is training yourself to succeed without flinching and to build without waiting for someone to penalize the building. That version of you, the one that moves without bracing and creates without shrinking, that is the version they were most afraid of. That is the exact version they designed the whole strategy to prevent. It is time to make that version permanent. Every person who connected with your work, who showed up consistently, who let what you created change something real in their thinking, every one of those people formed their own independent, direct impression of who you are. They were not told about you by someone with an agenda. They experienced you directly. They watched you build over time. They witnessed how you handled hard things. They saw the quality of what you create when you create from a real place. Those impressions cannot be revised from the outside. They cannot be whispered away. They are formed, fixed and real, and they live in people who, if asked, have something very specific and very credible to say about you. Your community is going to come through for you. Not just emotionally, though that matters, and you should receive it without minimizing it, but in the specific material way that people come through when one of their own is being unfairly targeted. They are going to speak, they are going to show up, they are going to represent, in the most concrete terms possible, the reality of who you are and what you have built and what it means to the people it was built for. Isolation was not a side effect of what was done against you. It was the strategy itself. Keep you alone enough, quiet enough, and doubting yourself enough, and there is no one left to contradict the version of you being constructed for people who might have mattered. But isolation requires compliance. It requires you to accept the isolation as a reflection of your actual value. You did not do that. You kept connecting even when it was hard. You kept showing up even when the conditioning whispered that perhaps you really were as difficult as they claimed. You reached out anyway, and the people you reached toward in the uncertainty, they saw what they saw. They formed impressions without agenda, just by paying attention over time. That is what your community represents, not a fan base, witnesses, and they are ready. When you were in the thick of building, putting one foot in front of the other, creating, connecting, showing up even on the uncertain days, you were doing more than building a body of work. You were building your defense, not defensively and not with any calculation, but simply by being real, consistently, in front of people who can recognize the difference between real and performed. The person who moved against you built something else entirely, a documented pattern of behavior, and the profound irony is that the same qualities they spent so long trying to undermine, your connection, your visibility, your influence, are the exact qualities now making their position indefensible. When this person looks at what you have built, The community, the influence, the reach, the respect, the undeniable substance of where your life has arrived, something in them is going to break. Not in a sympathetic way, but in the way things break when they can no longer hold the pressure of being catastrophically wrong. They are going to reach for whatever levers still feel accessible and pull them with the desperate energy of someone who cannot accept that the game has ended. And the people with actual authority who observe that desperation are going to see it for exactly what it is. Not the fury of someone who was wronged, the fury of someone who got caught. A request for mercy is going to arrive, with every performance tool in a very practiced arsenal. The waterworks, the framing of themselves as the real sufferer, the suggestion that surely grace should be extended toward them, the same grace they never once extended toward the person they spent so long trying to bring down. The universe is not cruel, but it is precise. You do not get to systematically work against someone's success and then claim compassion from the same mechanisms you used as weapons when those mechanisms turn toward you. The ask does not land. And here is something else that goes on to their permanent record, not just the official documentation, but the record of who they proved themselves to be when they believed they had enough power to act without consequence. That record becomes the context through which people who encounter them going forward will understand what they are truly capable of. In the most practical sense, it protects people who might otherwise have been the next target. This is a dimension of your influence they never anticipated. The community they tried to isolate you from is now the community that amplifies the truth. Every move made to suppress your voice gave your voice more reason to be heard. They tried to subtract from you and created the very conditions under which everything multiplied. They had absolutely no idea that is how chosen ones work, and now it is too late for that knowledge to do them any good. You know what you are now, not in an arrogant way, but in a grounded, earned, completely justified way. You have been through the thing that was supposed to stop you, and it did not stop you. You had doors closed in front of you and found other ways forward. You had your character attacked and let your work answer for you. You were told you were nothing and became someone that the person who said that cannot stop thinking about. Go bigger than they thought you would, not to prove anything to them but because it is true to what you are. The scope of what you can build is not determined by the ceiling they tried to install in you. The influence you carry belongs to the people it can reach, and the more of them you reach, the more fully you are doing exactly what you came here to do. Your importance is not measured by who acknowledges it. It is measured by what changes in the world because you showed up, and things have already changed. People have already been moved. Lives have already shifted because of what you built while under pressure. That record speaks for itself regardless of whether the person who tried to stop you ever admits how wrong they were. That admission is not coming, by the way. Not in the clean, full way that part of you might still be waiting for, but you do not need it. The confirmation you needed was never theirs to give. What you became in the face of the opposition is the confirmation, and what you became is someone worth watching, worth following, and worth standing up for. The finger that once pointed at your face now points in a different direction, forward, toward everything you are building, toward the people who need what only you can offer, toward a future that looks nothing like what they designed for you and everything like what you were built for. They had no idea, now they do, and there is not a single thing they can do about it.